Hello, everyone. First of all, I want to thank for the opportunity to present this paper at NASSH. Next, thank all the listeners for their presence. My name is Daniele Medeiros, and I am a professor at the Universidade da República in Uruguay, and I'm doing a postdoctoral research with Professor Marcelo Silva at the Universidade Federal do Paraná in Brazil. Today, we will both present a section of one of the research projects we are developing. The paper we will present talks specifically about a newspaper from the city of São Paulo called A Gazeta, which had great importance for the city's sports development. The title is The Newspaper A Gazeta and the New Relationship Between Sports and Urbanity, São Paulo, 1925 to 1943. It's necessary to look more closely at the city of São Paulo in the first decades of the 20th century to clarify the context of this presentation. The city was undergoing significant transformations during this period. By the end of the 19th century, São Paulo was already the state that produced 40% of Brazil's coffee, the country's main commodity. Economic development attracted immigrants from everywhere. In 1910, São Paulo had 375,000 inhabitants, second only to Rio de Janeiro, then the federal capital. The city emerged as one of the largest metropolises in Brazil and later in the world. The 1920s is known as São Paulo Belle Époque because the city urbanized in a way never seen before. In the meantime, the press was expanding at full speed. Newspapers and magazines projected the demands of a different social group onto a city and gave visibility to an accelerated process of occupation and intervention of public spaces in the developing metropolises. One of the most important newspapers created at this time was the periodical A Gazeta. This daily newspaper was created in 1906, based on Republican ideals to narrate the city's everyday life. However, the newspaper went through several financial crises in the early years until Caspar Libero acquired it. Libero was the son of one of the founders of the Paulista Republican Party and graduated in law from one of the country's leading universities. His first action in journalism was the founding of the newspaper Última Hora in 1911. In 1918, the journalist, helped by his brothers, bought the newspaper A Gazeta. His main goal for the periodical was to align it with the new ideas about the city. He intended to deliver a modern publication full of news that would serve the city's objectives. Our interest in analyzing the arrival of Libero as head of the Gazeta was related to the centrality that sports started to have in this newspaper. The modern and urban ideas, strongly encouraged by the new owner, were perfectly aligned with the attributions given to sports in this period in the city of São Paulo. Thus, this work aims to analyze the role of A Gazeta in the main productions concerning sports in São Paulo between 1925 and 1943. The selected time frame involves one of the main actions of the newspaper concerning the practice of sports in the city, the creation of outdoor sports events. The newspaper was responsible for the development of 3 of the leading sports events held in São Paulo. São Silvestre, a long-run racing event created in 1925, Swimming Across São Paulo, a water-resistant race disputed in the Tietê rivers, and July 9th bicycle race, created in 1933. The cycling and running events have occurred until today, and the aquatic competition ended in 1944. The journalist's death marks the final time cut, 1943. Sports journalism grew exponentially in the early years of the 20th century in São Paulo, as well as in several other parts of the world. Sticer points out that in São Paulo, the number of specific publications related to sports grew from 5 in 1912 to 58 in 1930, which helped consolidate the basis of sports diffusion, especially soccer. The newspaper A Gazeta was not far from this new trend in the São Paulo press. Libero had a great sense of opportunity and sought to generate profits for his newspaper, spreading information that the population would consume. At first, the newspaper had a sports section, part of the daily paper and usually presented on pages 4 or 5. This section had such a great success that the sports news started to be grouped in a supplement called a Gazeta Esportiva, which began to circulate on Mondays in 1928. In the 1940s, the supplement became a daily printed newspaper, one of the main Brazilian sports publications at the 20th century. For Toledo, this sports daily became an icon of the style and sociability of São Paulo's sports, engraving the mark of the metropolises, especially in the way of support. Besides creating an exclusive sports newspaper, a Gazeta had relevance in another aspect. From its censorship, led mainly by Casper Libro's articulations, the era of significant urban sporting events in São Paulo began. According to the journalist's biographers, Libro visited Paris in 1928 and watched a night running race in the French capital. This event was the model for creating a similar one in São Paulo in 1925. The San Silvestre Road Race, held on December 31, was established. For Vigarello and Terré, sport became a universally visible object in the 20th century. In this sense, the written press played an essential role in the diffusion of sports practices. So, the expansion and dissemination of these events by a Gazeta followed this logic, having well-defined goals to increase the sports popularity in the city and the enthusiasm about it. The first edition of the San Silvestre's World Race was held on December 31, 1925, with a course of 8.5 kilometers. The race began to be advertised by the newspaper in November of that year. According to the report, this would be the greatest success of the 1925 season and would be presented similarly to parallel events held in the French capital, London and Berlin. Initially, with clear French inspiration, the race would be held at night, and each competitor would carry a torch. The organization quickly discarded this idea. The routes were being analyzed. One possibility was a departure from the city center region to arrive at the Big Bridge, located on the banks of the Tietê River in the northern zone. Another alternative was to leave the Big Bridge and come to Paulista Avenue, the largest avenue in the city. Finally, the first route was chosen, considered the best possible route. In this first edition, the race listed 50 competitors, 48 participants and 37 classified. The winner of the race was Alfredo Gomes. According to the newspaper, the race was memorable, a noisy triumph that much honors the traditions of the glory of São Paulo athletics and enables us to continue with enthusiasm in our research. I quote, "This running race quickly became one of the most significant symbols of the city of São Paulo. Initially disputed only by Brazilians, the race has come to be recognized as the leading international event in Latin American athletics." The second race to be sponsored by the newspaper, probably due to the rapid popularity of the São Silvestre, was the swimming across São Paulo. The swimming cross, the most important event in São Paulo aquatic sports in the first decades of the 20th century, was instituted in 1924 by the newspaper São Paulo Esportivo, with the support of the Paulista Rowing Society's Federation. It consisted of swimming across the Tietê River, the city's main river. Throughout its existence, many changes have occurred, especially in the rules and routes. In general, the race started on the Vila Maria Bridge and ran westward until it reached the Spede Club, one of the most important rowing clubs in the city. In this region was located the Big Bridge, the aquatic sports reduct of the city, where more than 12 clubs were established in the early decades of the 20th century. The events known as crosswinds were famous elsewhere in the early of 1920s, and the São Paulo sports press wondered when a similar event would be held in São Paulo. The newspaper A Gazeta, in 1924, reported the buzz about a crossing race that would take place on the Tietê River from Penha to Big Bridge. So the newspaper São Paulo Esportivo decided to sponsor the competition and instituted prizes for all places. Months later, the first edition was held with the participation of 36 subscribers. The event in these moods was maintained until 1928, when the newspaper closed. In 1932, the race was re-established under the sponsorship of a Gazette. The second phase lasted until 1944, when the event ceased to exist. This event became successful in the 1930s, when it had more than 600 participants. This event was the most significant in São Paulo's sports swimming, and stopped being held in 1944. There are several reasons for this fact. First, the death of Casper Libero, a great promoter of sports events. Second, the river's pollution that caused the famous swimmers to catch typhoid fever after swimming in its waters. And third, the decline of the popularity of the swimming cross, especially with the rise of swimming pools in São Paulo clubs. The last major sports event established by Casper Libero was the July 9th cycling race, initially held in 1932. The race was conceived to honor the constitutional revolution in 1932, a moment when sectors of São Paulo's elite rebelled against the federal government led by Getúlio Vargas. To a certain extent, the competition became a symbol of São Paulo's urbanity and regional identity. According to Lessa, the race was expected to symbolize a definitive transition to a sportive and competitive consolidation of cycling. There was a clear intention to compare the race to others in different parts of the world, particularly those in Europe, especially the French ones. The routes were also detailed in the newspaper and realized in the central regions of the city. The start and finish in 1933 were again on Paulista Avenue, a symbol of São Paulo's urbanity. The course had a total length of 38 kilometers. The race has been established as one of the leading Brazilian races until today, and like the others, is a sports symbol of the city. To conclude, Casper Libero played a vital role in sports diffusion in the newspaper A Gazeta. The journalist allied his talent for business to his personal and passionate relationship with sport. This way, he saw emerging in the pages of his newspaper a grand narrative about the São Paulo sports practices. Thus, while increasing newspaper sales, Libero helped spread the sports practices throughout the city. This newspaper was consolidated by many the great transfer of printed narratives about sports in Brazil. Besides the narrative constructions, Casper Libero action was also in sports promotion. From his initiative, the first São Silvestre World Race took place, which had great success since the 1920s. Two other sports events were instituted from this action, with broad popular appeal and promoted extensive dissemination of sports in the city. More than mobilizing a crowd, these races ended up instituting new sports spaces in the city. It means that streets, squares, rivers, and bridges, previously understood only as paths, acquire different connotations for runners, swimmers, cyclists, and the public. In short, there has been a transformation of places into spaces of sport. This transformation was significant for the new relationship established between sports and urbanity. For example, streets such as Paulista Avenue or the Big Bridge region on Tietê River gained other meanings marked by sports events. After Libero died in 1943, one of the races ceased to be held, the swimming race. The other two, on the contrary, gained even more fans and established themselves as the most important in the national scenario. Furthermore, the newspaper A Gazeta was replaced by A Gazeta Esportiva in 1947, ceasing to be a general newspaper and specializing exclusively in sports narratives. Even though the path of A Gazeta has progressed further into the sports scenes after Libero's death, one cannot deny its role in the development of sports in the city of São Paulo. More than adding participants, its events ended up imprinting a new relationship between the city of São Paulo urbanity, and sports. Thank you.